I was in the midst of a busy day at my office, the familiar hum of efficiency in the background as I, Michael Carter, a corporate attorney known for my meticulous approach to life and work, sat immersed in legal briefs and the quiet cadence of productivity when a sudden vibration from my phone startled me. The screen illuminated with a text message from Samantha, my wife, whose words normally carried the comfort of home and shared dreams. Instead, the message read, "I just caught 3 fish today. The solitude is really helping clear my mind," accompanied by an image, a stock photo of a camping tent by a lake, one that seemed generic and out of place considering our lifestyle. For a brief, perplexing moment, I felt a twinge of amusement, a spark of curiosity mingled with mild confusion, as I tried to reconcile this message with the life we had built together. Samantha had always had a penchant for the outdoors, but this particular text, with its accompanying image that screamed cheap marketing rather than genuine spontaneity, left me unsettled. Before I could even reply, there was an abrupt knock at the door of my office, and in rushed Daniel, my best friend and confidant, his eyes wide with urgency as he held up his phone. He muttered in disbelief that Samantha's solo camping trip was nothing but a facade. On Facebook, I saw that she was actually living it up on a luxurious beach in Punta Cana, surrounded by lavish sunsets, intimate dinners, and stolen kisses with none other than Ryan, her male secretary. The images flashed before my eyes, a series of carefully curated photos that depicted a life of opulence and seductive escapades, a stark contradiction to the serene, nature-loving camping trip she had texted about. My mind raced as I compared the two narratives. On one hand, there was the promise of a humble, solitary retreat into nature meant to clear her mind, and on the other, the undeniable evidence of an extravagant getaway with a man whose presence, in those snapshots, was as intimate as it was provocative. Every image, every comment from her friends, painted a picture of a betrayal that cut deep into the fabric of trust we had woven over the years. I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach as I stared at the photos, my thoughts spiraling into disbelief and a rising sense of betrayal. My heart pounded, and a million questions echoed in my mind. How could she deceive me so completely? What was the meaning behind her fabricated camping story? And most importantly, why was she so eager to hide the truth behind a stock image and a cleverly worded text message? Even as the shock of betrayal began to settle, I found myself forced into an interactive moment of decision-making. The immediate impulse was to confront her, to call her right then and demand an explanation, to let my anger and hurt spill out unfiltered. Yet, deep within me, I recognized that an impulsive reaction might only give her the satisfaction of knowing that I was rattled by her lies. Instead, I made a conscious, deliberate choice, a decision to mask my inner turmoil behind a veneer of calm, to respond with a loving text that would not alert her to the fact that I was already planning my revenge. I typed back a message that was warm and affectionate, expressing excitement for her adventure and a promise that I would talk to her later, all the while my fingers trembling as they hit each key. Behind that carefully constructed reply, my mind was already whirring with plans. I began to consider every piece of evidence I had now unwittingly received, every digital footprint of her extravagant life in Punta Cana that was in stark contrast to the simple camping trip she had claimed. I opened multiple tabs on my computer, comparing her text with her Facebook posts, and I saved screenshots of every revealing image and comment. I knew that this would become the cornerstone of my eventual retribution, a silent record of betrayal that I could use to dismantle the life she had built on deceit. At that moment, the interactive choice in my mind presented itself clearly. Should I confront her immediately, letting her know that I was aware of every lie, or should I bide my time, letting the evidence accumulate while I plan a meticulous counterattack that would leave her with nothing? I chose the latter, for I understood that raw emotion could be easily manipulated, whereas cold, calculated precision would ultimately be my most powerful tool. With every screenshot, every piece of data secured, I felt the steady hum of retribution begin to build within me, a promise that she would soon face the consequences of her deception. As I glanced once more at Daniel, whose eyes reflected a mix of sympathy and grim understanding, I realized that my decision was made not out of weakness or despair, but as a necessary step to reclaim control over my life. The world around me continued its steady pace, the hum of the office, the murmur of conversations. But within me, a quiet storm was brewing. I locked the evidence in a secure folder on my computer, backed it up, and resolved that by the time she returned from her so-called solo getaway, I would have every shred of proof needed to dismantle her carefully constructed facade and rewrite the narrative of our shared life. I sat back in my chair, the weight of the revelation heavy on my shoulders, and in that silent, solitary moment, I vowed that the lie she had told, the lie that had changed everything, would be the catalyst for my transformation. I would not be the victim of her betrayal. Instead, I would rise above it with a plan as precise as it was unyielding, a plan that would ultimately redefine my destiny. And so, with a final glance at the screen showing the polished, deceptive image of a camping tent juxtaposed against the opulence of a beach getaway, I prepared myself for the long, arduous journey ahead. A journey where every choice I made would shape the future of my life, a future in which betrayal would be met with the relentless, unassailable power of truth and retribution. I found myself alone in the quiet of my study that night, the remnants of the earlier betrayal swirling in my mind, as I replayed every word and image of Samantha's deceptive message. I remembered how just a few days before, she had painted our future with the brightest promises. An overseas move that was supposed to be the culmination of our shared dreams, a promotion that would elevate our lives to heights we had never dared imagine. I recalled the countless late nights we had spent planning every detail, the long discussions filled with excitement and hope as we mapped out our new beginning. I had even sacrificed a high-paying job offer in New York to stay in Denver for her, believing wholeheartedly that our love and partnership were worth every compromise. But now, the dazzling picture she had so masterfully painted had disintegrated into a series of cold, harsh truths. Every promise of a better life had turned to bitter ashes in my mouth as I scrolled through the digital records and printed documents that confirmed what I had long feared. The overseas promotion was a lie, a carefully constructed ruse meant to lure me into a trap, and our savings, the very savings I had painstakingly accumulated and liquidated cherished assets to support our future, had been drained, emptied into accounts that I had no access to, and used to fund her secret getaway with her lover. I sat there, staring at the bank statements, the digital receipts, and the fragmented email threads that detailed every unauthorized transfer. My heart pounded with a mix of anger and disbelief as I realized that everything I had sacrificed was built on a foundation of lies. I could almost hear the interactive prompt in my mind whispering, "Do you acknowledge the warning signs you ignored? Or do you let this betrayal define your next move?" The thought was unbearable, yet it also lit a spark within me, a determination to document every sacrifice, every small sign that I had once brushed aside in favor of blind trust. I began to recall the nights when she would dismiss my subtle concerns with a light laugh, telling me that her late returns from business trips were nothing more than necessary sacrifices for our future, and that the sudden gym membership she insisted on was merely her way of keeping fit for the challenges ahead. At the time, I had reassured myself that her ambition was part of what made her so alluring, but now I saw that ambition was merely a mask for her betrayal. I started writing down every detail, the unexpected expense reports, the inconsistencies in her story, the furtive glances and hurried phone calls that I had once rationalized as the eccentricities of a busy career. My fingers trembled as I typed, not solely out of anger, but with the grim realization that every sacrifice I had made, every dream I had nurtured, was now being used against me. The evidence was irrefutable, and with every passing moment, the promise of a new life that Samantha had so enticingly sold me crumbled further into dust. As I compiled the evidence into a comprehensive log, I faced an interactive choice in my mind. Should I let this record fuel an immediate outburst of revenge, or should I allow it to guide my steps toward a carefully calculated counterattack? I chose the latter, knowing that if I reacted impulsively, I would only give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Instead, I resolved to use every ounce of this documentation as the cornerstone of my retribution. a meticulous ledger that would one day serve as the irrefutable testimony to her deceit. I remembered the excitement of our planning sessions, the promises made in quiet corners over cups of coffee, and how I had put my faith in her vision, a faith that was now as empty as the accounts she had drained. Each memory was a painful reminder of how deeply I had trusted her, and now that trust lay shattered before me like fragments of a broken mirror. In the solitude of that dark, silent room, I vowed that the sacrifices I had made, sacrifices of my own career, my personal ambitions, even my pride, would not be in vain. I would transform this betrayal into a weapon, a tool to reclaim not only my financial independence, but also the dignity that had been stolen from me. With a steady hand, I printed out every piece of evidence and filed it meticulously, knowing that one day, when the time was right, I would use it to expose the full extent of her lies to the world. I felt the weight of every lost opportunity and every shattered promise. Yet beneath that heavy sorrow was the burgeoning resolve of a man who had learned that even the most beautiful visions can hide the darkest secrets. I looked around my study, at the faded photographs of happier times and the stacks of documents that now chronicled the end of a life I had once believed in, and I knew that from the ashes of that betrayal, I would forge a new beginning. I resolved to move forward, to rebuild a future defined not by the empty promises of a deceitful partner, but by the unyielding strength of my own truth. In that moment of painful clarity, I understood that the new life Samantha had promised was nothing more than an illusion, a facade built on lies, destined to collapse under the weight of reality. And as I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair, the evidence securely locked away in both digital and printed form, I made a silent vow. I would not allow this betrayal to define me, but would let it be the catalyst for a future forged in fire and tempered by the hard lessons of deceit. My mind buzzed with the interactive choices of next steps, and I knew that every decision from this moment on would shape the path to reclaiming my identity, my assets, and ultimately, my freedom. I stood in the midst of our empty home, a place that once bustled with the energy of shared dreams and long-planned futures, feeling the weight of every sacrifice I had made, every promise I had believed in, now reduced to scattered remnants of betrayal. The night before our scheduled flight, when the harsh truth of our drained savings and the lie of a job waiting for me had become undeniable, I felt the crushing emptiness of a life dismantled piece by piece. The living room, once adorned with warm photographs and sentimental trinkets that chronicled years of love and partnership, was now bare and cold. Every chair, every table seemed to echo the loss of trust and the hollowness that followed when someone you trusted completely turns their back on you. I wandered from room to room, my footsteps slow and measured as I took in the sterile quiet, a silence that spoke louder than any confrontation could. In that silent void, my mind churned with interactive choices. Should I let the pain consume me, or should I transform this emptiness into the fuel for a meticulously planned vengeance? I resolved then that I would not be defined by my loss. Instead, I would use every ounce of this despair as a stepping stone toward reclaiming control. I sat down at the worn dining table, pulling out a notebook and a pen that had once been symbols of our shared hopes, and began to document every detail of our crumbling financial records, the bank statements that showed unauthorized transfers, the email notifications confirming the siphoning of our life savings, and even the silent confirmations of the joint account that had been emptied to fund her secret escape. Each word I wrote was a dagger of truth, a testament to the betrayal that had stripped me of everything I held dear. My mind, now hyper-aware of every interactive decision I had to make, posed questions in a steady, methodical tone. Do I confront Samantha immediately with the evidence, unleashing the raw, unfiltered pain of betrayal, or do I channel my hurt into a quiet, relentless pursuit of retribution that will leave no stone unturned? I chose the latter, understanding that while an impulsive outburst might offer a fleeting release, only a carefully orchestrated plan would ensure that her treachery would be repaid in full measure. I began to compile the evidence into a secure digital file, printing out each bank statement and cross-referencing every date, every sum that had disappeared from our joint account. I recalled the countless sacrifices I had made, turning down lucrative offers, selling cherished possessions to support her dreams of an overseas life, and investing every hope and ounce of trust into our future together, only to see them crumble under the weight of her deception. Each recollection fueled my determination to not only reclaim what was left of my identity, but to dismantle the very foundation of her treachery. As I reviewed the evidence, interactive choices surfaced in my mind. Should I immediately contact a trusted friend or financial advisor to help trace every dollar? Or should I continue to work in silence, preserving the integrity of my meticulously gathered data? I opted to reach out to a select few. Old friends whose loyalty had withstood the test of time, and whose expertise in financial matters I could rely on. Over discreet calls and encrypted messages, I began to piece together a comprehensive map of every unauthorized transaction. The result was a damning chronicle, a ledger of betrayal that showed how every dollar lost was a step toward her secret getaway with her lover. In that moment, the emptiness that had threatened to drown me was transformed into a beacon of resolve, illuminating the path to vengeance. I began to formulate my plan, each step calculated with the precision of a man who had nothing left to lose but everything to reclaim. I resolved that I would secure every asset, freeze every account, and make sure that when the time came, every piece of evidence would be used to expose her deception in the cold light of truth. I could almost see the interactive prompt in my mind. Press 1 to launch a full-scale investigation of the finances, or press 2 to quietly accumulate evidence until you have an irrefutable case. I chose to press forward with methodical diligence, knowing that every piece of evidence would serve as ammunition in the legal and personal battles to come. I began making discreet calls to a trusted financial analyst and a private investigator, setting in motion a plan to trace every cent that had been siphoned away. Each conversation was laced with the raw determination of a man who had transformed his emptiness into a resolve so strong it bordered on cold calculation. The bitterness of betrayal, once a searing pain in my heart, had now crystallized into an unyielding promise that I would not allow Samantha's lies to define my future. Instead, I would reclaim my identity, piece by piece, dollar by dollar, until every vestige of her treachery was purged from my life. In the silent hours of that night, as the house creaked under the weight of memories and broken promises, I locked away every document, every screenshot of our depleted accounts, and every email that confirmed her deception. I organized them meticulously, creating a digital vault that I could access only when the time was right. The cold, hard truth was now in my hands, and I felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the very emptiness she had left behind would serve as the foundation of my resurgence. With every calculated decision, I resolved that I would no longer be the victim of her lies. I would become the architect of my own destiny, building a future defined by integrity and the relentless pursuit of justice. As I closed the notebook and stared out the window at a night that promised both darkness and the faint glimmer of dawn, I knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But I was ready. The emptiness that had once threatened to engulf me was now the fuel that would drive me toward retribution. A retribution that would ensure that every betrayal was repaid in full, and that the memory of this lie would be forever erased by the unyielding power of my comeback. In the aftermath of my painstakingly documented financial betrayal, I reached a point where personal vengeance was no longer enough. I needed the cold, unyielding machinery of the law to seal the fate of my treacherous ex-wife, Samantha, and anyone who had aided her deceit. The evidence I had compiled, every bank statement, every digital transaction, and every whispered secret message, had now coalesced into an irrefutable dossier that left no room for denial. One quiet morning, as the early light filtered softly through the blinds of my home office, I sat before my computer and dialed the number of my longtime legal advisor, a man whose reputation in corporate law and financial fraud was as unyielding as my resolve. My voice was steady as I explained the situation. A cascade of unauthorized transfers, a meticulously orchestrated siphoning of our savings, and a planned escape that left me abandoned with nothing but betrayal. He listened intently, his silence punctuated by the tapping of keys as he recorded every detail. "You have the evidence," he said slowly, "and with what you've gathered, we can move beyond this personal heartbreak into a full-blown federal investigation." His words resonated deeply with me. I realized that my fight was now a battle for justice on a scale that transcended our broken marriage and threatened to expose a sophisticated financial scam. That very afternoon, I composed an email, each word chosen with clinical precision, to a trusted federal agent whose name I had come to rely on from previous cases. The message was succinct, outlining the extent of Samantha's fraudulent transfers, the secret accounts, and the elaborate web of transactions that had funneled every dollar away from our joint future. I attached every piece of evidence I had painstakingly gathered, from detailed spreadsheets to scanned copies of digital correspondence, ensuring that the dossier was as comprehensive as possible. As I hit send, I felt a mix of apprehension and grim satisfaction. This was the moment when the law would finally intervene, turning the tide in my favor and ensuring that Samantha's deception could no longer be concealed behind polite lies and smiling facades. My mind then presented a series of interactive choices. Should I release the entire dossier publicly, risking an outpouring of media frenzy that might taint my own reputation, or should I maintain a low profile and let the investigation proceed quietly behind the scenes? I chose the latter, understanding that the pursuit of justice, when left to its own devices, was far more effective than a hastily broadcast scandal that might backfire and cast doubts on my own integrity. Over the next few days, I fielded calls from concerned investors and business partners, all of whom had begun to sense that something was amiss in our financial operations. My responses were measured and confident. I reassured them that every necessary step was being taken to safeguard our assets and that the truth would emerge through due process. I maintained a calm exterior as I convened discreet meetings with my legal team, carefully reviewing the chain of custody for every document and ensuring that all digital backups were secured on encrypted servers. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on me as I recalled every sleepless night spent poring over fraudulent transactions, every moment of betrayal that had driven me to this point. Now, with federal agents beginning to circle the wagons, the investigation was gaining momentum. I received a discreet update from my lawyer. An FBI agent had confirmed that the evidence was robust enough to consider Samantha's actions as part of a larger, sophisticated financial scam. The agent's measured tone left no room for ambiguity. If the authorities pursued the case, Samantha and her co-conspirators would be facing a barrage of charges that could dismantle not only her personal fortune, but also the shadowy network of deceit that had been built around her. My mind buzzed with interactive prompts. Press 1 to fully disclose every piece of evidence now, or press 2 to withhold some details to use as leverage in the coming legal battles? I chose to disclose everything, knowing that any hint of withholding information could later be used against me in the courtroom, and that transparency was my strongest shield in a case so damning. As the investigation ramped up, I observed that even Samantha's new lover, Ryan, who had once flaunted his charm with careless bravado, began to show signs of nervousness. Rumors began to swirl in hushed tones in the corridors of the business world. Investors who had once idolized her now distanced themselves, and soon, even the media started picking up on the scandal. I made sure that every update from the authorities was documented and cross-referenced with my own, meticulously kept records. With each passing day, the investigation deepened, and I felt the cold hand of justice slowly closing in on the perpetrators. My office became a sanctuary of strategy and careful planning, where late nights were spent revisiting every digital trace, every transaction, and every secret meeting that confirmed the extent of Samantha's betrayal. I would often sit back in my chair, staring out at the city skyline, a tapestry of glittering lights that now symbolized both the wealth I had built and the promise of retribution that was inevitable. I knew that the legal battle ahead would be long and arduous, filled with the challenges of exposing a fraud so intricately woven into the fabric of our shared life, but I was prepared. Every choice I made, every interactive decision taken in those moments of quiet contemplation, reaffirmed my commitment to reclaim not just my assets, but my dignity and the truth that had been hidden behind layers of deceit. In that moment, as the weight of the investigation pressed in and the first whispers of a federal probe began to circulate, I felt an unyielding determination, a quiet, relentless promise that the lie which had upended my life would be met with the full force of justice. And so, with my legal team at my side and every document securely locked away as evidence, I embraced the path ahead, knowing that while the road to vindication was paved with the cold, harsh reality of betrayal, it was also the only path that would lead to a future defined by truth and the unassailable power of self-determination. I sat in the quiet of my study late one evening, the only sound the steady ticking of an old clock and the soft hum of my computer fan, when a new email notification flashed across the screen with a subject line so ominous it sent a shiver down my spine. "You'll regret this." In that moment, I felt as though the ghosts of the past had found a way to speak to me from beyond the grave of our shattered union. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked open the message, knowing full well that it was sent on a schedule I had once predicted. A final, desperate attempt by Samantha to leave a parting shot behind even as her world crumbled. The email was brief and stark, containing a single audio file attachment. As I pressed play, Samantha's voice filled the room. A voice that I had known so intimately and yet now carried the unmistakable cadence of regret and bitterness. In the recording, her tone was conflicted, alternating between cold calculation and a hint of sorrow, as if she were aware that the consequences of her actions were coming back to haunt her. She spoke of how she had planned to take everything from me, to disappear with Travis and build a new life without leaving any trace of the past. Every word was a dagger, a confession that even in her final moments, she sought to shift the blame and cast me as the villain in our tragic narrative. But what struck me most was the mention of one final accomplice, a detail that chilled me to the bone. Samantha, in her final message, had hinted that her younger sister, Ava, was complicit in her schemes, a person who might hold the last piece of the puzzle that could unravel everything I had worked so hard to secure. Her words, delivered with a trembling vulnerability that contrasted sharply with the bravado of her earlier lies, promised that Ava might be coming for revenge, that she would not allow the truth to be forgotten easily. In that moment, I felt a surge of interactive choice within me. Should I let this final threat fester, or should I act immediately to secure my future against yet another betrayal? I knew that this message was not merely a parting shot from a defeated lover, but a ticking time bomb, a final warning that the web of deception was far from over. I immediately forwarded the email and the attached recording to my legal team, ensuring that every bite of evidence was preserved and ready to be used in the coming legal battles. Every detail had been recorded meticulously over the past months, and now Samantha's final confession, however desperate, would serve as another brick in the wall of undeniable proof. As I leaned back in my chair, I allowed the recording to play on a loop, the sound of her voice mingling with the rhythmic ticking of the clock, a haunting reminder that the past never truly dies. It merely waits in the shadows for its moment to resurface. I thought about all the times I had doubted my own perceptions, times when I had dismissed the subtle red flags, the late-night phone calls, the unexplained expenses as nothing more than quirks of a busy life. Now, those whispers of suspicion had become a roaring tide of evidence, and Samantha's parting message was a final confirmation that I had been right all along. I felt a mixture of emotions, sorrow for the love that had once been, anger for the betrayal that had shattered it, and above all, a cold, calculated determination to protect my future at any cost. The interactive prompts in my mind echoed the choices I had to make. Do I confront Ava directly, risking an escalation of the conflict, or do I prepare for her potential arrival with a layered strategy that would neutralize her threat before she could unravel the life I had painstakingly rebuilt? I chose the latter. I immediately contacted my security team, instructing them to increase surveillance and monitor all communications for any sign of Ava's movements. I also arranged for a confidential meeting with my legal advisors to update our case, ensuring that every new piece of evidence, including this final recording, was integrated into the comprehensive dossier I had built. I recalled the moment when Samantha first shattered our shared illusions with that ill-fated text and the stock image of a camping tent, a lie that had changed everything. And now, even as her final words echoed in the silence of my study, I felt the resilience that had grown from that betrayal. The voice of interactive choice in my mind now whispered, "Do not let the dead speak louder than your will." I resolved that the ghosts of the past, including Samantha's desperate confession and any further machinations by Ava, would serve only to strengthen my resolve. Every piece of evidence, every minute detail, would be weaponized to protect the future I had reclaimed. I began drafting a detailed memo outlining the steps I had taken to secure my assets and further isolate any remnant of her influence, a document I would soon share with federal investigators if necessary. The memo was not written in a tone of bitterness, but in the clinical language of a man who had learned that truth, when pursued relentlessly, was the most powerful weapon of all. As the recording finally ended, I closed my eyes for a moment and allowed myself to feel the gravity of the past, its weight, its pain, and its lessons. I then steeled myself, knowing that the final threat posed by Ava was yet another challenge in the long road to complete vindication. I reminded myself that while betrayal might leave behind echoes in the dead, it is the living who must ensure that those echoes never undermine their future. With a final, resolute click, I locked away the evidence, the digital record of Samantha's final message, and in that act, I vowed to confront any new threat with the same unwavering determination that had guided me thus far. The past, with all its dark secrets and whispered betrayals, had tried to dictate my future, but now I held the power of truth in my hands, a power that would ensure that the legacy of deception would be consigned to oblivion. In the quiet of that night, as the city outside slumbered unaware of the storm that continued to brew, I sat in my study, fully resolved that the dead may speak, but it is the living who write the final chapters of their destiny. I awoke to a day that carried the bitter taste of finality, a day when the carefully laid plans of betrayal that had once seemed invincible were now crumbling into irrelevance. The public exposure of Samantha's deceit had set off a chain reaction that rippled through every corner of her once sacred world, and as I sat in my office reviewing the morning's headlines, I felt the weight of a destiny long forged in retribution settling firmly upon my shoulders. The news was unrelenting. Articles splashed across major networks proclaimed corporate betrayal exposed, the fall of Samantha, and fraud, deceit, and a shattered empire. Every word, every image, painted a stark portrait of a woman who had built her life on lies and had finally been brought to her knees by the very evidence she had thought would remain hidden. I watched with a calm detachment as the public narrative turned against her, investors distancing themselves with each passing hour and business partners severing ties as her reputation disintegrated in real time. My phone buzzed constantly, calls from reporters, inquiries from investors, and messages from friends who had once expressed concern about the way things had been unfolding. I fielded these communications with the measured tone of a man who had long learned that true power lies in quiet control rather than loud confrontation. Every call was a reminder that the downfall I had meticulously orchestrated was now irreversible. The legal, financial, and social ramifications of her betrayal were spreading like wildfire, and there was no turning back. I recalled the many nights I had spent compiling evidence, the painstaking process of documenting every unauthorized transfer and every whispered secret, and felt a surge of vindication knowing that every single piece of data was now a weapon against her. My legal team had been working tirelessly behind the scenes, and I received discreet updates that the federal investigation was gaining momentum. Regulatory bodies were combing through her financial records, and the SEC had begun its probe into the labyrinth of transactions that had emptied our joint accounts. I could almost sense the interactive decision point in my mind. Embrace this public fallout fully, or use it as a stepping stone to further secure your assets? I chose the latter, knowing that my long-term victory would not be measured by momentary triumphs, but by the unyielding strength of the foundation I was building. As the day unfolded, I began to see the real effects of her downfall in the subtle shifts around me. Former allies of Samantha, who had once lauded her charm and charismatic leadership, now whispered her name with disdain. Even in the boardrooms where our shared business had once thrived, colleagues exchanged sympathetic glances at my expense while discreetly discussing the scandal. I could feel the power dynamic shift as the scales of public opinion tilted decisively in my favor. I spent the afternoon preparing a series of official statements and investor communications that reassured our stakeholders of the stability and renewed vision of the company. Statements carefully worded to emphasize transparency, integrity, and the swift corrective actions I had implemented. Each sentence was crafted with the cold precision of a man who had transformed personal betrayal into a catalyst for rebirth, and as I sent these communications, I knew that the market was beginning to see me not as a victim of deception, but as a resolute leader who had turned adversity into opportunity. My phone continued to ring with the ceaseless buzz of reporters and corporate inquiries, but I met every challenge with a steady, unyielding calm, confident that the evidence and the truth would speak for themselves. Meanwhile, Samantha's world continued to unravel. I watched as her employer, once dazzled by her promises, terminated her employment on the grounds of misconduct and fraudulent activities. Her personal bank accounts, already drained, were now flagged for suspicious activity, and her credit cards were canceled one after another. Ryan, her accomplice, faced his own barrage of legal troubles as more evidence emerged linking him to the intricate financial scam. I felt a grim satisfaction, not born of malicious glee but of the undeniable truth that every betrayal had consequences. The interactive choices that had once demanded my cautious deliberation now converged into a single, irrevocable outcome. Her empire was falling apart, piece by piece, and there was no rescue, no redemption for her false promises. I made a final call to my legal team to ensure that all the gathered evidence was handed over to the federal investigators, a final move that would seal the case against her and leave no room for doubt. As I stepped out of my office later that evening, the cool night air mingling with the distant hum of the city, I reflected on the monumental shift that had taken place. I had watched as the woman who had once deceived me and built her life on stolen dreams was now a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that in the realm of corporate fraud and personal betrayal, the truth is the ultimate arbiter. Every piece of evidence, every documented transaction, had now become an indelible part of a narrative that would resonate far beyond my personal vendetta. I knew that the fallout would continue to reverberate in the corridors of power, in the whispers of those who had once celebrated her, and in the cold, unyielding reports of financial analysts and legal experts. And as I walked the quiet streets that night, with the lights of the city reflecting in my eyes, I felt a sense of profound closure mingled with the promise of new beginnings. I had reclaimed my assets, my dignity, and my future through a relentless pursuit of justice, and while the scars of betrayal would never fully fade, they had become the foundation upon which I would build a new chapter, a chapter defined not by the bitterness of revenge, but by the unassailable power of truth and the promise of a life rebuilt on my own terms. Every step I took carried the weight of that truth, and with each step, I affirmed that no amount of deception could ever truly destroy a man who was willing to fight for what was rightfully his. I woke one crisp morning with a clarity that felt both exhilarating and humbling, a sense that the final echoes of betrayal were finally receding into the past, and that the future was now mine to shape from the ground up. The wreckage of what once was, our shared dreams, the stolen savings, the ruinous public scandal, had been methodically dismantled piece by piece, and as I stepped out into the cool light of dawn, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I now stood not as a broken man defined by betrayal, but as someone who had reclaimed his identity through relentless pursuit of truth and the cold, unyielding power of calculated retribution. In the weeks since the downfall of Samantha and the complete collapse of her fraudulent empire, I had poured every ounce of my resolve into rebuilding my life. I had secured all of my assets and restructured our business in a manner that left no trace of the deceit that had once threatened to shatter my entire world. My legal team and financial advisors worked in unison with a precision that reminded me why I had chosen to walk away from the life I once knew. With every investor call and every boardroom meeting, I reaffirmed my commitment to transparency, integrity, and a future unburdened by the ghosts of deception. They marveled at the transformation of a man who had once been betrayed and broken, and now exuded an air of quiet confidence that could only come from knowing that every hard-won scar was a badge of honor. I began to invest in new ventures, not out of a desire for revenge or accumulation of wealth alone, but because I saw in these opportunities the chance to create a future defined solely by my own terms. I reached out to young entrepreneurs, sharing the lessons learned from my own painful journey, urging them to guard their trust and remain ever vigilant in a world where deceit lurks beneath even the most alluring promises. Each conversation with these bright, aspiring individuals reinforced my belief that my struggle, though harrowing, had given me a a voice that could guide others away from the pitfalls of betrayal and towards a future built on resilience and self-determination. I also made a conscious decision to embrace forgiveness, not for the sake of those who had wronged me, but to liberate myself from the perpetual chains of bitterness. In quiet moments of reflection, I allowed myself to acknowledge that while Samantha's actions had caused irreparable harm, holding on to that anger would only serve to weigh me down. Forgiveness, I realized, was less about absolving her and more about freeing myself to move forward with a clear mind and an open heart. With time, the images of lost savings, ruined relationships, and shattered dreams began to blur into the background, replaced by a focus on every new sunrise and every small victory that marked my progress. I secured a modest new home, a sanctuary that was entirely my own, a place where each room echoed with the promise of new beginnings rather than the ghosts of a painful past. I spent weekends renovating it, carefully selecting each piece of furniture and every decor element with the intention of creating a space that reflected my renewed sense of self. I would often sit in the quiet of the evening, a glass of fine scotch in hand, and watch the city lights shimmer outside my window, a silent reminder that while the night may be dark, it always gives way to the promise of dawn. In that transformative period, I redefined my identity, not by the betrayals that had scarred me, but by the resilience that had allowed me to reclaim everything I thought I had lost. I embraced the future with a resolve that was as unyielding as it was quiet, knowing that each day was an opportunity to build a life where trust was earned through transparent actions and every decision was guided by the hard-won lessons of the past. And as I closed the final entry in my journal one cool evening, I raised my glass in a silent toast, a promise to myself that this rebirth, this new beginning, was not merely a response to betrayal but a celebration of the indomitable human spirit capable of rising again and again from the depths of despair to create a future defined by strength, integrity, and the unassailable power of self-determination.